In the spring of 1952, deep within the lush, rolling hills of the Appalachian Mountains, lay the idyllic village of Hollow Creek. Home to about 200 residents, it was a place where everyone knew each other's names, and generations had lived and worked the land. The village was a tapestry of whitewashed cottages, blooming gardens, and the eponymous creek that wound its way through the heart of the community. On the morning of May 12th, Richard Owens, a seasoned traveling salesman, steered his truck along the winding mountain road that led to Hollow Creek. The sun filtered through the dense canopy of trees, casting dappled shadows on the path ahead. Richard hummed a tune, anticipating friendly faces and good business. He had been visiting Hollow Creek for years, supplying the general store with goods and bringing news from the outside world. As he approached the village outskirts, an unsettling stillness settled over him. The usual sounds of village life, the distant laughter of children, the clatter of horse hooves, the ring of the blacksmith's hammer, were absent. The air felt heavy, and an eerie silence pressed in from all sides. Richard drove into the main square and parked in front of the general store. The door was ajar, its bell silent as he stepped inside. Shelves were stocked, and the cash register remained unlocked, a stack of bills untouched beside it. "Hello," Richard called out, his voice echoing unnaturally. There was no reply. He ventured back outside and walked the length of the village. Houses stood with doors open, curtains fluttering in the breeze. In one home, a meal sat half-eaten, forks resting on plates, as if the diners had simply vanished mid-bite. The schoolhouse was empty, lessons abandoned. A bicycle lay on its side in the middle of the road, wheels slowly turning. A sense of dread gnawed at Richard. He hurried to the church at the edge of the village, its white steeple piercing the sky. Inside, the pews were empty, hymnals open to silent songs. The only sound was the creaking of the old building settling. Desperate for answers, Richard headed toward the neighboring town of Briarwood, 20 miles away. As he drove, he couldn't shake the feeling that unseen eyes were watching him from the shadows of the dense forest. Upon reaching Briarwood, Richard burst into the sheriff's office, his face pale and eyes wide. "They're gone," he stammered. "Everyone in Hollow Creek, they're all gone." Sheriff James Turner, a stern man with kind eyes, listened skeptically at first, but the genuine terror in Richard's voice compelled him to act. Gathering a team of deputies and a few townsfolk, he set out for Hollow Creek that afternoon. The search party arrived as the sun began to dip behind the mountains, casting long, foreboding shadows. They split into groups, scouring every building, every alley, every corner of the village. What they found mirrored Richard's account. No signs of struggle, no indication of a hurried departure, and no clues as to where the villagers had gone. At the edge of the village, near the entrance to the old Hollow Creek mine, one of the deputies called out, "Sheriff, over here!" Carved into the bark of several ancient oak trees were strange symbols, intricate patterns of circles, lines, and what appeared to be eyes. The designs were unsettling, their meaning obscure. "Could be kids messing around," one deputy suggested nervously. Sheriff Turner shook his head. "I've never seen anything like this. Let's document it." As darkness fell, the group decided to stay overnight in the village. They built a bonfire in the main square, its light pushing back the encroaching shadows. The men shared stories to keep their spirits up, but an unspoken fear lingered. Around midnight, a faint sound drifted through the air, a low humming, almost imperceptible at first. It grew steadily louder, resonating deep within their chests. The flames of the bonfire flickered wildly, casting distorted shadows. "Do you hear that?" whispered one of the townsfolk. Before anyone could respond, the humming ceased abruptly. An oppressive silence followed, heavier than before. The men exchanged uneasy glances. "Maybe we should leave," another suggested. Sheriff Turner nodded. "At first light, stay close and keep watch." Morning couldn't come soon enough. The team wasted no time in returning to Briarwood, where they reported their findings to state authorities. In the days that followed, investigators descended upon Hollow Creek. They brought dogs, set up equipment, and interviewed anyone who might have information. News of the vanishing spread, attracting journalists and curious onlookers. Despite exhaustive searches, no traces of the villagers were found. The mine was explored but yielded no clues, just old tunnels and the lingering echoes of the past. Geological surveys showed no signs of sinkholes or natural disasters. There were no reports of mass sightings on roads leading away from the village. Speculation ran rampant. Some believed the villagers had been abducted by a cult or secret organization. Others thought they might have succumbed to a toxic gas leak, though no evidence supported this theory. Whispers of the supernatural grew louder. Elders spoke of ancient legends, tales of spirits that guarded the mountains, angered by those who disturbed the sacred land. The strange symbols were compared to Native American petroglyphs, but no definitive connections were made. One journalist, Emily Harper, dug into the village's history. She discovered that Hollow Creek had been established on land once considered sacred by the indigenous people who lived there centuries ago. There were records of disputes and warnings, but time had buried those memories. Emily wrote an article suggesting that perhaps the villagers had unwittingly awakened something ancient. Her piece was dismissed by many as sensationalism, but it struck a chord with those who felt there were forces at play beyond human understanding. As months turned into years, the mystery remained unsolved. Hollow Creek became a ghost town, its buildings slowly succumbing to nature. Vines crept over walls, roofs caved under the weight of snow, and the forest began to reclaim the land. Occasionally, hikers and explorers would venture into the abandoned village. Some reported feeling an inexplicable sense of dread, while others claimed to hear faint whispers carried on the wind. A few even saw fleeting figures in the corner of their vision, shadows that vanished when turned upon. In 1972, a paranormal research team conducted an investigation. They recorded unusual electromagnetic readings and captured audio of indistinct voices. Their findings reignited interest in the Hollow Creek mystery, but skeptics dismissed the evidence as inconclusive. Today, the fate of Hollow Creek's residents remains one of Appalachia's most enduring enigmas. The village stands as a silent monument to the unknown, a place where questions linger and answers remain elusive. Visitors are rare, but those who do venture there often leave with a deep sense of unease. Some say that on quiet nights, when the moon is full and the wind is still, you can hear the distant sound of laughter and see lights flickering among the ruins, a ghostly echo of the life that once thrived there. In the early spring of 1938, the quiet town of Black Hollow, nestled deep in the forests of northern Maine, became the site of one of the most haunting mysteries in American history. Known for its dense woods, misty mornings, and a population that rarely exceeded a few hundred, Black Hollow was a place where everyone knew everyone else, and life moved at a slow, steady pace. The town's isolation was both its charm and its curse. Few outsiders passed through, and even fewer decided to stay. Yet for the townsfolk, Black Hollow was home, a small haven where people helped their neighbors and shared stories by firelight on long winter nights. But all of that changed on the night of April 3rd, when the mysterious lights first appeared. It was just after midnight, and the town had long since gone to sleep, the only sounds the occasional hoot of an owl or the whisper of wind through the pines. But suddenly, an unearthly glow swept over the town, casting strange shadows on the old clapboard houses. The light pulsed, shifting from a soft blue to an eerie green, bathing the streets in a ghostly luminescence. The residents awoke, stumbling out of their beds to look out their windows. Some ventured outside, shielding their eyes against the brightness that filled the sky. The lights moved in strange patterns, swirling above the treetops, before converging over Black Hollow's oldest landmark, the Stone Circle. The Stone Circle was a ring of ancient stones that predated the town itself, believed to be remnants of a long-forgotten civilization, or perhaps even something supernatural. Locals avoided the place, especially at night, whispering that it was cursed. Now the lights hovered there, casting a haunting glow on the stones before vanishing without a trace, leaving the town in darkness once again. By morning, the townsfolk gathered to discuss what they had seen. Some believed it was an atmospheric phenomenon or a strange weather event, while others thought it was a sign, an omen. They recounted the tales of the Stone Circle, the warnings passed down through generations to respect the ancient site. But as the sun rose, the strange lights became the town's only topic of conversation. The next night, just after midnight, the lights returned. This time they were even brighter, and they moved with purpose, sweeping over the town as if searching for something. The people of Black Hollow were afraid, yet a few brave souls, led by Sheriff Walter Briggs, decided to follow the lights to the Stone Circle. The small group gathered torches and lanterns, trudging through the dense forest toward the clearing where the ancient stones stood. The air grew colder as they approached, their breaths fogging in front of them. The silence was so intense that even the usual night sounds of crickets and owls seemed to have faded away. When they reached the Stone Circle, the lights were gone. The stones stood silent and cold under the starlit sky. Sheriff Briggs led the group in a cautious search, hoping to find some sign of what was causing the lights. But the ground was undisturbed, and the forest around them was as still as death. The sheriff knelt beside one of the stones and noticed strange markings, symbols that hadn't been there before. He traced them with his fingers, feeling the grooves that were etched deeply into the rock. They looked like spirals and eyes, their purpose or origin unknown. Over the next week, the lights continued to appear each night, always around midnight, always circling the Stone Circle before disappearing. The townspeople grew increasingly anxious. Livestock began behaving erratically, cows refused to leave their pens, dogs howled at nothing, and chickens ceased laying eggs. Children reported seeing figures in the woods, dark shapes that vanished when approached. In desperation, Sheriff Briggs sent word to the nearest large town, hoping for help. A group of researchers and journalists arrived days later, equipped with cameras, recording devices, and notebooks. Skeptical at first, they quickly grew uneasy after witnessing the lights themselves, describing them as unlike anything they had seen. Dr. Eleanor Marks, a professor of anthropology with a particular interest in folklore, examined the Stone Circle and the newly appeared symbols. She was baffled. "These markings bear no resemblance to any known language or culture," she reported. "They seem primal, perhaps even pre-human." Dr. Marks theorized that the lights were linked to the stones in some ancient, unknown way. She suggested that the stones might be a gateway, though she couldn't say to where. Her theory, while unsettling, provided the only plausible explanation. On the 8th night, just as the townsfolk had begun to accept the lights as a strange but harmless phenomenon, something changed. The lights appeared earlier, brighter and more intense than before. They didn't hover over the Stone Circle this time. Instead, they moved through the town, weaving between houses and casting eerie shadows that danced on the walls. People watched from their windows, too frightened to step outside. And then, just as suddenly as they had come, the lights vanished. The town was plunged into silence. No one dared move, each person holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. A low, resonant hum began, seemingly emanating from the stone circle, echoing through the forest and sending shivers down the spines of everyone in Black Hollow. And then, a scream. It was loud, chilling, and unmistakably human. The townsfolk rushed toward the sound, which led them to the edge of the forest near the stone circle. They found Sheriff Briggs's hat on the ground, his lantern still burning beside it, but he was nowhere to be found. A frantic search ensued, lasting well into the dawn. The sheriff's footprints led to the stone circle, where they abruptly ended as if he had simply vanished. Dr. Marks, along with her team, insisted on staying to investigate further, but the townspeople were done. In their minds, the stone circle was cursed, and they refused to go near it again. Over the next few weeks, many families left Black Hollow, unwilling to remain in a place haunted by the unexplained. Dr. Marks and her team continued their research, but without the sheriff's support, they had little access to local knowledge. Eventually, even they abandoned their efforts, leaving behind unanswered questions and a few cryptic journal entries about the lights and the mysterious symbols. Years passed, and Black Hollow slowly emptied. By the 1950s, it was all but abandoned, its houses overtaken by nature, the forest reclaiming the streets. The stone circle remained untouched, standing quietly in the clearing, shrouded in vines and moss. Occasionally, hikers would pass through and report strange sightings, glowing orbs hovering in the distance, strange symbols appearing on the stones, and the faint sound of a hum that made the ground seem to vibrate. Today, Black Hollow is a forgotten place, a whisper in the annals of unexplained mysteries. The lights have not appeared in decades, but those who visit claim they can feel an unsettling presence near the stone circle, as if the ancient stones are watching, waiting for the right moment to reveal their secrets. The mystery of Black Hollow remains unsolved, a tale passed down by those who remember, a story of lights that haunted a town and the souls that vanished into the silent night. In the winter of 1893, the remote settlement of Fair Hollow, located in the dense, mist-shrouded forests of Washington state, experienced one of the strangest disappearances on record, the vanishing of Morrow House and everyone within it. It began as a small but thriving community of lumber workers and farmers. At the edge of town sat Morrow House, an imposing Victorian mansion owned by the wealthy yet eccentric Ezra Morrow, known for his reclusive nature and his fascination with the occult. Ezra Morrow had moved to Fair Hollow years earlier, settling in the lonely mansion, surrounded by towering pines and a thick canopy that shrouded the area in near-constant twilight. Locals often saw strange visitors, mysterious figures dressed in long cloaks and hooded capes, arriving at odd hours and disappearing behind Morrow's doors. Rumors swirled about Ezra's late-night gatherings and whispered conversations that drifted from the mansion's open windows on the rare nights anyone dared to approach. On February 14th, just after a fierce storm had swept through the region, all traces of Morrow House and its occupants vanished overnight. At dusk, two young men from town, Charles Walker and Henry Doyle, made their way up the path to Morrow House, delivering supplies for the upcoming spring planting season. They knocked at the mansion's heavy iron-bound door, expecting the usual terse greeting from Mr. Morrow's assistant, a silent man named Langley. When no one answered, they called out, but the house remained silent. Cold air seeped from under the door, carrying an odd, metallic tang. Concerned, they returned to town and told the sheriff, who gathered a small group of men and set off for the mansion. Snow fell lightly as they made their way up the winding road, and the wind howled between the trees. When they arrived, however, they found only empty ground where Morrow House had once stood. The mansion had vanished, leaving a barren, muddy patch surrounded by trees. Dumbfounded, the group searched the surrounding area. There were no footprints, no signs of struggle, and no debris to suggest that the building had collapsed or been moved. The house was simply gone, and with it, Ezra Morrow, Langley, and the few servants who lived on the estate. The snow, undisturbed, blanketed the area as if nothing had ever stood there. The sheriff sent word to nearby towns requesting assistance. By the following week, investigators from the state arrived, along with a handful of curious journalists eager to report on the disappearing house of Fair Hollow. The ground was thoroughly examined, and teams scoured the forest for clues. They even excavated parts of the soil where Morrow House had once stood, hoping to find a foundation or remnants of the structure. What they found instead was far stranger. Beneath the spot where the mansion had been, they unearthed a massive stone slab etched with unfamiliar symbols, circles, spirals, and strange angular patterns unlike any known language or writing. The slab was deeply embedded in the earth, indicating it had been there long before Morrow House was constructed. A team of researchers led by Dr. Helen Browning, a professor from Seattle with expertise in ancient languages, arrived to study the slab. After days of analysis, Dr. Browning concluded that the symbols resembled no known script, but seemed to be ritualistic in nature, perhaps related to ancient rites or summoning practices. She speculated that Morrow may have discovered the slab and become obsessed with its secrets, conducting ceremonies atop it that had caused his eventual disappearance. As word of the mystery spread, locals began to share old stories about the area surrounding Fair Hollow. Elders spoke of the forest as cursed land, a place that had been avoided by indigenous tribes for centuries due to its unsettling energy. Some claimed that the area was once used for dark rituals by an ancient cult, long before European settlers arrived. The presence of the slab fueled these beliefs, and many in Fair Hollow came to believe that Ezra Morrow had tampered with forces beyond his control. Some residents remembered seeing lights in the forest near Morrow House on certain nights, a pale green glow that pulsed like a heartbeat, visible even from the edge of town. One woman, Ruth Anders, swore she had seen ghostly figures moving between the trees on the night before Morrow House disappeared. She described them as shadow people who drifted silently through the forest, only to vanish when she tried to focus on them. In a stroke of curiosity and determination, Dr. Browning requested access to Ezra Morrow's personal effects, which had been left untouched in town. Among his belongings, they found a worn, leather-bound journal filled with Morrow's cramped handwriting. The final pages were a jumbled mess of fragmented thoughts, descriptions of symbols, and references to an opening he was trying to achieve. The last entry was especially cryptic. Tonight is the night. The alignment is perfect, and the forest waits. I feel the hum beneath my feet, calling, urging me to complete the circle. They are waiting, watching. Soon I will join them beyond the veil. Langley and the others understand. They have seen the truth. After this entry, the journal ended abruptly. Within months, Fair Hollow saw a mass exodus. Families left, unwilling to remain in a town haunted by what locals called the Morrow Curse. By the end of 1894, only a handful of stubborn residents remained. The area where Morrow House had once stood was avoided. No one dared venture too close to the eerie, barren patch in the forest where the ground felt colder, even in summer. Dr. Browning and her team made occasional visits over the next decade, still captivated by the mystery, but their findings grew less and less conclusive. Eventually, even they abandoned the project. Today, Fair Hollow is a ghost town, the houses overrun by weeds and slowly decaying under the canopy of the dense forest. Only the oldest maps of Washington state even mark its existence, and few dare to seek it out. On certain cold, clear nights, travelers near the region have reported seeing a strange green glow emanating from deep within the woods, pulsing faintly, as though calling for something or someone. And in that lonely clearing where Morrow House once stood, the ground remains empty, but legends of the missing mansion endure, a haunting reminder of what happens when secrets buried in the past are unearthed. In the cold, grey autumn of 1921, the small fishing town of Foggy Cove on Newfoundland's rugged coast became the site of a chilling mystery that would haunt locals for generations. The townspeople were no strangers to the sea's dangers, as many families had lost loved ones to the icy waters of the North Atlantic. But nothing had prepared them for the strange events that unfolded in late October. It began on October 21st, just after midnight. John McAllister, the town's lighthouse keeper, spotted a faint glow through the dense fog blanketing the coastline. As he peered through his binoculars, he made out the shape of a large ship drifting toward the cove. Its sails were tattered, and it moved silently across the water, despite there being no wind. McAllister sounded the alarm, thinking it was a vessel in distress. The townsfolk gathered at the shore, lanterns in hand, watching the mysterious ship as it floated eerily close to land. But before anyone could board, it vanished into the fog as if it had never been there. No one could explain it, and despite scouring the coastline the next day, they found no trace of the ship or its crew. Over the next week, the sightings continued. Each night, residents reported seeing not one, but several ghostly ships drifting through the fog. Some saw grand old vessels with billowing white sails. Others witnessed smaller fishing boats, all eerily silent and glowing faintly in the mist. The ships never lingered, disappearing as quickly as they had arrived, leaving only an unnatural chill in the air. By the fourth night, rumours began to spread. Some whispered that the ships were the souls of sailors lost at sea, returning to find their way home. Others believed they were ghostly warnings, portents of a great disaster. Some even claimed to hear voices carried on the cold ocean breeze, faint calls for help, desperate cries that faded into the fog. An elder named Aidan Thorne, whose father and grandfather had both been fishermen, claimed to recognize one of the ghost ships. He swore it was the Nightingale, a fishing schooner lost in a storm 50 years prior, taking with it several men from the town, including Thorne's own uncle. The townsfolk grew uneasy, for Thorne's story was well known. A storm in 1871 had swept away an entire fleet of local fishing boats, their crews never seen again. Over the years, sailors and fishermen from Foggy Cove had passed down stories of the lost fleet, warning each other never to sail too close to the edge of the fog. Yet the town had never witnessed anything like this. On October 28th, as the fog settled heavily over the cove, the townspeople gathered once more by the shore. This time, a thick sense of dread weighed on them. The ocean seemed darker, more ominous, the waves lapping quietly against the rocks as if hiding something just beneath the surface. The first ship appeared just after midnight. A grand, three-masted vessel, its sails hanging in shreds, the hull covered in seaweed. Behind it followed another, then another, until more than a dozen ghostly ships filled the cove. They drifted in a solemn procession, their wooden decks creaking, the faint outlines of shadowy figures moving aboard. As the townsfolk watched in terror, the silence was broken by a long, mournful horn echoing through the mist. Then, faint and distorted, came the sound of bells and the low murmur of voices, a chorus of lost souls calling out from across time. Some of the townspeople dropped to their knees, praying or clutching each other in fear. Amidst the ghostly fleet, the townsfolk noticed a smaller boat, a simple fishing vessel. Standing at its helm was a figure in a dark coat, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He raised one hand, pointing toward the town, as if beckoning them. Suddenly the entire fleet began to fade, each ship vanishing one by one, into the thickening fog. The last to go was the small fishing boat, its captain staring directly at the townspeople as he dissolved into the mist. The next morning, the town was eerily silent. Fishermen refused to go out to sea, children stayed indoors, and even the bravest among them felt a deep chill in their bones. News of the ghostly fleet spread, attracting the curiosity of nearby villages and even a handful of researchers. Some locals believed that the ghostly procession had been a warning to the town, a call to respect the lives lost to the sea and the dangers that lurked beneath the waves. Others claimed it was the lost fleet's final journey home, their restless spirits finally finding peace. Over the years, people continued to report strange sightings along the shore, ghostly ships appearing in the distance, flickering lights across the water, and the faint sound of bells on misty nights. Many chose to leave Foggy Cove, fearing the ghosts of the sea, while others took comfort in the legend, believing their loved ones had finally come home. Today, the legend of the ghost ships of Foggy Cove remains a haunting tale of lost sailors and the sea's mysteries. On foggy autumn nights, locals say you can still see lights flickering out on the water, shadows of ships moving silently through the mist, a reminder of the souls claimed by the unforgiving sea. In the spring of 1924, the abandoned Ravenswood Asylum on the outskirts of Bristol, England, became the centre of a haunting mystery. Built in 1868, Ravenswood had once housed hundreds of patients deemed mentally unsound by society. Its grim reputation spread quickly, with whispered tales of questionable treatments and patients who were never seen again. By the early 1920s, Ravenswood was shut down, its halls left empty, and its shadowy corridors claimed by silence. But in April of that year, a group of 5 local teens, led by a boy named Simon Fletcher, decided to explore the decaying building. Drawn by tales of ghostly sightings and the dark history of Ravenswood, they dared each other to enter on the night of April 19th under a waning moon. Only one returned. The 5 friends crept up the cracked stone steps of Ravenswood just before midnight, flashlights in hand, and nervous laughter barely masking their fear. The heavy oak door groaned as they pushed it open, and a rush of stale, cold air greeted them from within. Their flashlights illuminated flaking wallpaper, rusted medical instruments left scattered on metal carts, and the faded, tattered remnants of patient files. As they moved deeper into the asylum, the silence was broken only by the occasional drip of water echoing through the halls. Dust coated every surface, undisturbed since the asylum had closed. After a while, they came upon the main hallway leading to the old patient rooms, each with a small, scratched-up plaque bearing a patient's name and number. They dared each other to look into the rooms, finding only empty iron bed frames, decaying mattresses, and, in some cases, dark stains on the floors that made them uneasy. But it wasn't until they reached the lower floors, where the intensive care patients were once kept, that things began to take a darker turn. Down in the basement, the air was colder, almost icy. The walls were lined with rooms that had no windows, padded cells with reinforced doors. As they moved further into the basement, a soft scratching noise echoed down the hall. It was faint but unmistakable, like nails scraping slowly along the walls. They laughed nervously, but the fear was creeping into their voices. One of them, Peter, joked that they should go back, but Simon insisted they push on to see the infamous Red Room, the last room on the floor where the most dangerous patients were supposedly kept. But as they approached the Red Room, things went silent. The scratching had stopped, and an oppressive stillness settled over them. Just as Simon reached for the door handle, the lights on their flashlights flickered, plunging them into near darkness. In the silence, they heard it, a faint voice whispering their names. The teens froze, glancing at each other with wide eyes, They tried to laugh it off, but the fear was evident. Simon, trying to maintain his bravado, swung open the door to the Red Room. Inside, the walls were lined with faded, bloody handprints, as if someone had clawed at them in desperation. The air smelled of iron and decay. Simon's flashlight flickered once more before going out completely. In the darkness, a scream pierced the silence, raw, terrified, and close. Disoriented and panicked, they scrambled to find the exit. But as they stumbled through the darkened halls, they found the layout of the asylum had somehow shifted. Every turn led them deeper into the building, to rooms they hadn't passed before, to dead ends that made no sense. And then, one by one, they began to disappear. By dawn, only one of the teens returned, Simon. He staggered out of the asylum, bruised, scratched, and visibly shaken, his eyes wide with terror. He could barely speak, mumbling incoherently about shadows and voices, about hands reaching out from the walls. The townsfolk found him wandering the road back to town, in shock and unable to say what had happened to his friends. When questioned by police, Simon could only describe a sense of being chased by something unseen, something that lurked in the darkness. He claimed he saw his friends dragged away by shadowy figures, their faces twisted in silent screams. He remembered hearing their voices calling for him, even after they had vanished into the dark. Search parties scoured Ravenswood Asylum for weeks, hoping to find some trace of the missing teens. But the building yielded nothing. Not a single sign of the four who had gone missing. Police and locals examined every room, every corridor, but there was no evidence of anyone else having been there. The rooms were as silent and empty as they had been before. Only one thing seemed strange. In the Red Room, freshly scratched into the faded wallpaper, were the initials of each of the missing teens, as though they'd been carved there with desperate, shaking hands. Rumours spread quickly after the incident. Some believed that the spirits of Ravenswood's forgotten patients had taken the teens as revenge, angered by the desecration of their final resting place. Others speculated that Simon himself had somehow orchestrated the disappearances, though no evidence ever surfaced to support this. People began to talk about the Ravenswood curse, claiming that anyone who entered the asylum was doomed to be lost forever. Paranormal investigators, journalists, and curious locals ventured into Ravenswood over the years, each drawn by the mystery of the missing teens and the whispers of ghosts within its walls. Some of these visitors returned with strange stories of disembodied whispers, of footsteps echoing down empty halls, of shadowy figures glimpsed just out of sight. Others heard faint, terrified cries and laughter that seemed to come from the very walls, but others never returned at all. By the 1970s, Ravenswood Asylum was officially condemned and eventually sealed off to prevent further accidents. The doors were welded shut, the windows barred, but the legend of the missing teens and the haunted halls of Ravenswood Asylum continued to grow. To this day, people report seeing lights flickering in its broken windows on foggy nights and hearing faint screams carried on the wind. Simon Fletcher, the lone survivor, left town shortly after the incident. He was never seen or heard from again. Those who knew him claimed that he would sometimes mumble about hands in the dark and voices that wouldn't leave him alone. His disappearance only fueled the legend of Ravenswood. Today, Ravenswood Asylum stands abandoned, hidden by vines and slowly being claimed by the forest. Few dare to approach it, but those who do swear that if you stand close enough on a quiet night, you can still hear faint whispers calling out from its crumbling walls, a chilling reminder of the night 5 teens dared to enter and only one emerged. The mystery of Ravenswood Asylum remains unsolved, its shadowed halls holding secrets that time has yet to reveal. and every now and then on dark, stormy nights the townsfolk of Bristol avoid the road that leads to Ravenswood, just in case the spirits within still remember who dared to disturb their eternal rest.